Do you like fully cooperative board games, especially one with a unique and quirky theme? Do you enjoy time traveling, just like Doctor Who? Or do you even consider yourself a time variant like Loki in that Marvel TV show? Well, there's a game that wraps all of those components into one nice, neat package, and in this video, we'll be checking out the board game, The Loop. So on my turn, I'm going to place these 4 red rift cubes into the time machine. And then I flip my character card over to move to an adjacent era, and then tap my artifact. Well, you should actually spread yourself across the board so that you can complete more missions more efficiently. And who exactly are you? I'm you from the future in about 60 minutes from now, and I've seen how this game plays out. How exactly are you here right now? Someone's put this board game review on loop and I've been on repeat ever since. The Loop is a fully cooperative board game where players take the role of temporal agents as they travel to different eras throughout time, all with the aim of trying to thwart off Dr. Faux's evil clones and his plan, and ultimately destroying his time machine. It's like you're working for Marvel's Time Variance Authority. Players will win if they can successfully complete 4 missions as shown by these tiles on the exterior of the board, which specifies certain conditions that need to be met. The game board is like some sort of time-bending pizza, with each zone representing a different era. Think of it as a slice in time, starting with the dawn of time, through the medieval era, into the Renaissance, industrial and globalization era, and ending with the age of robots and end of time. But in the Loop, does time really end, or does it repeat? I guess we'll never know. Throughout the game, Dr. Faux will be adding the pressure as he produces clones that appear across the 7 different time eras like some sort of Loki variant. Those clones will then also cause these red rift cubes to pop out of this magenta-coloured Pez candy dispensing machine like some lolly shooting machine from the 90s. So these clones, aren't they just copies of Dr. Faux? Well, not quite. I think they're variants, actually. Take this board game Pandemic, for example. Imagine if this was the original Dr. Faux, and then from the original spawns variants, or different versions of the game. Do you know what I mean? I see. Kind of like Into the Spider-Verse, I guess. What on earth are you doing to those board games? Oh, nothing? The Dr. Faux clones are a very pivotal part of the board game. They're kind of like the Loki variants spread throughout all of space and time. Players are essentially aiming to push and pull those clones back into an era that matches their colour. By doing that, they create a paradox which flings those clones back into the time warp. Each of the 7 eras can only hold a maximum of 3 red rift cubes. That's kind of to stop the ripples from destroying time altogether. If a 4th red rift cube were ever to be added to that era, it would explode Pandemic style, and a vortex would occur. If a 4th vortex is ever placed on the board, all players lose. Additionally, if a 2nd vortex has to be placed on an era with a vortex already, players will also lose. Each player in a game of the Loop has a very important critical role for restoring the balance of time itself. Players throughout the game will be controlling one of these chunky wooden time agents as they fling themselves throughout the different eras as they use their special abilities to alter the course of their own destiny. Each temporal agent in the game has a special ability. Mr. Time allows you to move another agent around the board. Robo-Finisher 404 is like the Robocop of the Time universe, helping players to manipulate the number of cubes there are in an era based on the number of clones destroyed. The Time Prowler helps to manipulate the impact of this lollipopping time machine, whilst the blue undie-wearing furball can move to any era. Whereas V-Girl, which sounds like an energy drink, she can reuse the abilities of artifacts that have been recently destroyed. Each player will be controlling a character that has a unique deck of cards. Players will be acquiring artifacts from around the game board to build a deck that helps them to synergize and develop their playstyle throughout the game. Players on their turn have 3 main actions, which they can execute as many times as they wish up until they run out of the resources to do so. Players can move by spending 1 green energy cube from their era to move into an adjacent era. They can also move for free by flipping over their character card to the other side. Players can also choose to tap their 3 artifact cards to use their ability or effect. The synergy from the usage of these artifact cards helps to reshape time and get those clones under control. There are a couple of ways that players can acquire these awesome artifacts into their deck. First of all, they can end their turn on an era where there are face-up artifacts available, from which they choose one from that era and place it on top of their deck. Another way to acquire them is to also complete missions. You'll also notice that on the cards there are different symbols. There's the line symbol, the swirly spiral symbol, and the star symbol, and the black hole symbol. Basically, those suits are very important when it comes to looping and untapping and refreshing the cards to use them again for bonus additive effects. The headquarters board is the primary place which determines how many Dr. Faux clones as well as how many red rift cubes are placed out onto the game board at the beginning of each player's turn. Players are going to be cycling through this deck of 7 cards, and on these cards features a symbol, one that each matches with the 7 different eras on the game board. It also tells you to place 2 red rift cubes plus the number of clones in that particular era for that round. Players will be using this board to determine how many clones and how many artifact cards to place out on the board in that particular turn. Players will be drawing their clones from this very brightly coloured orange bag and placing them down in their respective regions. It's important to note that this deck consists of 7 cards, and after players cycle through all 7 cards, this deck will move to the next spot on the headquarters track, and more clones and artifacts will be placed out onto the board each and every round, and there's going to be exactly 21 turns in an entire game of the loop. If this deck of 7 cards ends up at the end of this conveyor belt of doom before players complete 4 missions, then players will lose the game. The third action that players can take is called the loop action, which is probably my favourite action of all. Players can pay 1 green cube from their era to untap or refresh any artifact cards that have already been used. They can only refresh cards of the same suit. The cards that feature a black hole can never be refreshed. This refreshing ability provides players with the benefit of reusing or looping their action. Players can refresh their cards by paying additional green energy cubes each time they want to refresh them. Each character has a unique starting deck of cards that adheres to a certain playstyle. At the end of a player's turn, if they ended in an era with a face-up artifact card, they can take it and put it at the top of their deck for immediate use in the next round. Players are essentially using the artifact cards to build an engine, essentially a machine, which is their deck. The artifact cards allow you to destroy clones, add energy cubes, cull cards, and move efficiently around the board. Completing missions are players' only way of escaping this Groundhog Day of a game by satisfying their conditional requirements such as destroying clones in Dr. Faux' era, adding green energy cubes to the specified era, or performing a loop on different eras. By completing the missions as quickly and as efficiently as possible, players have the power to change their future, which would be enough to make Marty McFly super proud. So in considering my final verdict, the Loop is a really fun cooperative board game that... Hang on a sec, you can't end the video yet. You haven't let people know what the pros and cons of the game are. Didn't you already say you already knew what was going to happen in this video? Yes, but I didn't want to spoil it for everyone else. Next time I'll remember to send you that work email to keep you in the loop. What really impresses me about the Loop is the fact that you can build some really cool decks. The fact that this game actually is a deck building game that kind of provides you with the actions that you need to execute the moves that you want is really cool. And that means if every time you approach this game, you're going to be building a slightly different deck each time and exploring some really cool card combos. And it's the combos themselves that really makes this game shine. The way I play my deck might be very different to the way my partner plays the deck. And the particular character I choose will lead you down a particular play style and play strategy. And I really like the looping mechanic in this game. The fact that you can use a cube to then untap a particular card of a particular suit and then use those abilities again and then use them to try and get more green cubes to then untap and tap again and use those abilities a second or potentially a third time. The ability to repeat the actions and chain them and cascade those actions just makes the planning side of this game quite strategic, and the sort of conversations that you might have about how to optimize the moves on your turn using just the 3 cards in front of you can sometimes take over the game itself, which is actually a great thing, because that's what I love about cooperative games, that chance to converse and talk and discuss and come up with a really good plan of attack. If there is a point to consider that I would probably highlight is that even though this game is very enjoyable at the 2-player count, I found it really hard to complete some of the missions just by only using 2 characters, because some of the missions actually require characters to be on either side of the current activated era, meaning that you have to almost predict where the time machine's going to end up and then end your turn hoping that the time machine will kind of end in that right position, which made it very challenging at the 2-player level. Whereas if you've got 4 players, you're spread across the board in lots of different locations and it's much easier to complete those missions. And you can easily get around that by just giving each player at the 2-player level 2 characters to control. And finally, the thing I really want to highlight is the fact that there are so many different extra modes and levels of difficulty to play. And we're talking about not just a slight rule change, but we're talking about a completely different version of the game itself that is really hard, ultimately challenging, and is really going to cater for those people who really want to dive deep into the game. The alternative modes of playing the loop are graded by their different levels of difficulty. One mode introduces mega vortexes, which causes players to lose the game if they ever end their turn on them. Incorporating these Super Saiyan glob-like Dragon Ball style clones causes additional red rift cubes to be added to the machine equal to the number of Super Saiyan clones already removed from the game. They also leave blue perpetual energy cubes behind, which are permanent energy cubes that are never removed from the board. Playing with the centrifuges affects the way that you can activate your artifact cards on your deck. Centrifuges only allow you to activate artifact cards with a matching icon on it. And finally, the Ultra Machina mode replaces the Dr. Faux cards with an Ultra Machina machine deck, which adds 3 Ultra Machina cards every time the Dr. Faux machines ends at the end of time's era. So you might be thinking now, how similar or how different is the loop from Pandemic? And I can proudly say that both games are quite different, despite the fact that they have a very familiar cube pushing and cube spreading mechanic. In the loop, the cube mechanic itself isn't the crux of the game. It's actually the clones and how they move across the board. I like to describe the loop as a mishmash between Pandemic and Spirit Island, as you're pushing and pulling the clones and trying to get rid of them. In fact, if you let one of the time eras build up with a lot of clones, that is going to really exponentially increase the number of potential red rift cubes that could get deposited in that area. That makes the loop, in my opinion, more challenging than in Pandemic. There's an element of Pandemic that is also quite predictable, where you can kind of see where those outbreaks are potentially going to happen based on the cards that you've drawn and places that are going to get reinfected. With the loop, it is far more dangerous and far more difficult to try and manipulate the state of the board. The other thing that I think the loop is really good at doing is giving players a variety of different actions. In Pandemic, each player has a special character with a special ability and pretty much the same actions as every other character, kind of leading down towards that alpha player effect. Whereas in the loop, because everyone has kind of a semi-unique deck of cards, they kind of have a little bit more control and asymmetry in terms of how they're going to execute their turn. And that's where the loop is a lot better than Pandemic. That deck building element, being able to decide what sort of actions are going to optimize on your turn and being able to spend green energy cubes to reuse certain actions just makes the loop far more interesting and varied and puzzly at the same time. And considering my final verdict, the loop is probably one of the best fully cooperative board games I've played this year. In fact, I love the multitude of different layers, combos, and synergies that the game evokes, and you really need to grab a towel because it's gonna make you sweat a lot. If you really like games like Pandemic, which I consider gateway games to the modern board gaming world, then the loop is definitely a really great next level fully cooperative game. And if you really like the loop, then consider it as a stepping stone to bigger fully cooperative games like Spirit Island, which is one of my favorite board games of all time. Now, if you really like fully cooperative games, you want to check out more content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the other videos on this channel. If you really want to become a board game sanctuarian, don't forget to check out my Patreon page and check for all the latest news updates on my Facebook page. This is Danny signing out. I'll see you next time. It's time to play some cooperative board games. Why are there bananas in my video?